We've got breaking news out of the NFL. The Raiders are releasing quarterback Geno Smith. That's per multiple reports. The move will save Las Vegas $8 million in cap space this upcoming season. The Raiders hold the #1 overall pick in this year's draft and are widely expected to take former Indiana quarterback and Heisman Trophy winner Fernando Mendoza. Smith struggled in his only year with the Raiders, throwing 19 touchdowns and a league-leading 17 interceptions. That's the first to do that since 2023 when Sam Howell, when you talk about leading the league in those INTs and sacks in the same season. So this now clears the way, of course, for the Raiders to take Fernando Mendoza, #1 overall, and slide him into that QB1 spot immediately. This is Ryan Wilson's latest mock draft where he's had Mendoza entrenched there at 1 for quite some time. Speaking of Ryan Wilson, he will tap in with the show in about 10 minutes to give his thoughts on everything moving forward. Keep it locked here on HQ. We've got breaking news out of the NFL. The Raiders are releasing quarterback Geno Smith. That's per multiple reports. The move will save Las Vegas $8 million in cap space this upcoming season. The Raiders hold the #1 overall pick in this year's draft and are widely expected to take former Indiana quarterback and Heisman Trophy winner Fernando Mendoza. Smith struggled in his only year with the Raiders, throwing 19 touchdowns and a league-leading 17 interceptions. He'll now become a free agent ahead of the 2026 season. Multiple angles to take from this news, so we bring in the two-piece hitter, Jonathan Jones and Ryan Wilson. And JJ, I'll start with you here. The timing of this, why now for the Raiders, even if we were expecting this?
Yeah, certainly expecting this. We can report that it is either going to be a trade or a release. A trade is extremely unlikely. He is guaranteed $18.5 million in salary for 2026. Another $8 or so million is guaranteed on the third day of the league year. And so because of that, it was very clear, very obvious that the Raiders were ultimately going to move on from Geno Smith. And because of that money that is due to him coming off the worst season of his career, at least on the field, right, with the 17 interceptions, no team is going to be trading for Geno Smith. And so we've been talking a lot about Kyler Murray and talking about Tua Tagovailoa and how they have very big contracts. And so because of that, when they get released, they're still due that guaranteed money. So teams will be paying them the veteran minimum of $1.3 million, and that money will offset. The same is going to apply here with Geno Smith. He's still due that $18.5 million. I don't see him getting more than $20 million from any team that may be interested in him, else they would be trading for him. And so he will be playing very, very likely on the veteran minimum as well this upcoming season.
Yeah, that's right, JJ. And I think you make an important point. And when we talk about Tua, when we talk about Kyler, those young men are in their late 20s, and Geno Smith is in his mid-30s. That's also a complicating factor. And the fact that he didn't play very good football last fall did not help as well, because the expectation was that he was going to be traded to Vegas in that Pete Carroll year-1 system, and things were going to take off. And the exact opposite happened. But I think there's an NFL where Geno Smith is going to be a starter again. This feels a little bit like what we saw with Russ Wilson when he was cut by Denver and ended up in Pittsburgh on that one-year deal, parlayed that into another contract the year after with the Giants. I think Geno's a little better than Russ is at those similar stages, but he's got to, as you noted, he's got to quit turning the ball over, and that's the big issue for him. So fit matters, as we like to say. Is he going to be the next Sam Darnold? Probably not, because he's 7 years older, but I do think there's an opportunity for him to get back to the form we saw 3 or 4 years ago when he was at his best with the Seahawks.
JJ, Ryan brings up the point that I wanted to get to next is this next stop a starting spot for Geno Smith, or is it as a backup? And hearing Ryan say, he thinks that he can be a starter somewhere he goes. What do you think of that, and where do you think he might be able to end up?
Yeah, it's going to be possible, right? Like he's probably, because he's going to be released and he's going to have his choosing, he could go somewhere. He could choose to go somewhere that it could be an open competition in training camp, right? Go back to last year with Daniel Jones. He could have stayed with the Minnesota Vikings, but they had J.J. McCarthy. And so he goes to Indianapolis, where he said, I think I could probably beat out Anthony Richardson in training camp. He was right about that. So does Geno Smith try to do something like that, right? Does he try to go to, let's say, in Arizona, for example, where maybe they had their eyes set on Jimmy Garoppolo, but could Geno beat him out in a quarterback competition? Can Jimmy Garoppolo stay healthy? TBD. One place that's not going to be in the cards is the New York Jets, right, Zach? I mean, like, he got punched in the face there. It ended so poorly. And yes, it is a regime change, and it's a completely different from top to bottom, except for, of course, the owner. But that's just not going to wind up happening. And so more than likely, the odds are that in week 1 of 2026, Geno Smith is going to be someone's backup with the potential to ultimately start if injury happens or bad play takes place. One place that I would just keep an eye on, the Carolina Panthers. Okay, they have Bryce Young. They're issuing the 5th-year option on Bryce Young as he heads into his 4th year. But they're going to get rid of Andy Dalton, and they need another backup quarterback. And Dave Canales spent a lot of time with the Seattle Seahawks. And Brad Idzik, the offensive coordinator, spent some time with the Seattle Seahawks. And so if Geno wants the opportunity to start week 1, Carolina's not going to be the place for him. If he wants to go somewhere where there is comfortability and familiarity, Carolina may be the spot for Geno Smith.
This is me, Zach, marking off the New York Jets. That is not going to be a landing spot for our guy. Look, if you move the Jets to Delaware and call them something else, maybe Geno might be interested, because they desperately need someone like Geno, especially, you remember the Dante Moore return to college, and they're picking at number 2. There's not a quarterback worth taking there. What do they do at 16? So that's something to sort of, I do love the idea of Carolina, which JJ mentioned, because we've seen a lot of quarterbacks, Andy Dalton being the most recent example, going to a place where you're not having to do a whole bunch. You may have to play 3 or 4 games a year, and you can elevate the play of the offense if there's a young quarterback in front of you struggling or injured, and that's a pretty plum position. Another team that immediately popped into my head, and they are in terrible salary cap situation right now, the Minnesota Vikings. And we preach up and down Kevin O'Connell's ability to get the most out of any quarterback, age or otherwise. I feel like Geno Smith in that offense would absolutely cook, and he would go there and have to, quote unquote, compete for the job. But this is year 3 of people competing against J.J. McCarthy. 2 years ago, J.J. got hurt and Sam Darnold happened. Last year, J.J. was not playing very well, and Carson Wentz played just as not well as he did when he was in there. Geno Smith would be an upgrade. Now, they got to figure out the money to get him there, and even if it's a veteran minimum, they got to make that happen, because I think they're $45 million over the cap as we sit here. And the only other team that I was sort of thinking about, again, in a capacity where you have to win that job, would be Miami once they move on from Tua. It's Quinn Ewers, who the team actually likes, the former 7th-round pick, but his name is not etched in stone as the starter. And if Geno could go down there in South Florida weather and sling it around, I would imagine he'd have a good chance to win that job as well.
Yeah, Geno, an opportunity to see if the folks will cash a check and write back again for him in his career. You look, though, at the Raiders and the holes that are now created with the money saved here, $8 million in cap space, JJ. What could that mean for the potential to try to sign Max Crosby to a new deal?
So this is what is incredibly interesting, Zach. First of all, I'd be surprised if Max Crosby winds up being with the Las Vegas Raiders and signing some sort of extension with them. I do believe that he's gone, and we'll get to that point in a second. But the money that is saved by releasing Geno Smith, they're still going to have to pay him. The Raiders are below the salary cap floor. You have to spend a certain amount every 3 years in these sort of tranches. That's what the NFL and the NFLPA, that's what they mandate, so that teams don't try to go the cheap way out. The Raiders are really nowhere close to that. And so if you're not paying guys like Geno Smith, you're not paying guys like Max Crosby, you have to pay someone, and they have to spend, the Raiders do, a lot of money this upcoming couple of weeks. And so the Raiders are going to be big players in free agency because they absolutely have to. Now, on that man right there, Max Crosby, what is going to happen to him? There are a few teams that are very closely monitoring the situation. Sources have told me that the top 3 teams right now would seem to be the Chicago Bears, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Baltimore Ravens. Now, clearly, nothing has happened with Max Crosby. I am told that nothing right now is imminent with Max Crosby being dealt somewhere. But I do expect him, if John Spytek, the general manager of the Raiders, can get what he wants. Is it going to be 2 1s? I doubt it. But could it be a one and something else that ultimately the Raiders can take back and say, here, this will help us continue to build our foundation as we lose one of the better players in the NFL? I do think that that ultimately can happen. Again, nothing imminent. A lot of teams keeping a close eye on the Raiders, but do keep an eye on the Bears, the Cowboys, and the Ravens.
Yeah, certainly an interesting situation to monitor there when you look at the Raiders, who have so much going on. Ryan, obviously the #1 pick in the draft coming up here shortly. Fully expecting Fernando Mendoza to be that name called, but now that they get rid of the guy who was their starter and you leave behind Kenny Pickett and Aiden O'Connell as the starters, as the QBs in that room, just how important is it for the franchise to hit and for Fernando Mendoza to truly deliver as a #1 overall pick now?
I mean, it can change the face of a franchise overnight, right? And Zach, you're a Panthers fan, and you saw the struggles that Bryce Young had early in his career, and he's starting to figure it out. But the player that went #2 in that draft, C.J. Stroud, turned things around immediately for Houston. He has since found his own struggles, but that team has won double-digit games and gone to 3 straight playoff appearances, and I think they've won playoffs each of those 3 years as well. So that can happen. We saw what happened with Drake May in the New England Patriots. It took a season for him to get his bearings. They changed the front office and the coaching staff, and they got that right. So it's very real that it could happen. Now, the question becomes, how do you grade Fernando Mendoza compared to the Drake Mays of the world, the C.J. Strouds, even last year, the Cam Wards? And he's probably going to come a little below those guys in terms of the way he played. That said, he's a fantastic leader. He's a wonderful human being, and he shows up in the biggest moments. A lot of the questions about quarterbacks trying to make that transition, and Drew Aller is a great example. He looks the part getting off the bus, but when the lights are shining brightest, you see them wilt. That is not Fernando Mendoza. He might throw some clunkers in the first half. When it's the last drive of the game and they need 4 points, he's throwing touchdowns in the end zone. And I think his season at Cal in 2024, where he took what felt like 400 sacks, will train him perfectly what he's about to endure in 2026 in Las Vegas. So he is used to having some adversity on the football field, and I think that will prepare him for what's to come. That said, I think he's going to be a really good quarterback, and he is going to change the tenor of that franchise if the owner can stay out of the way.
And obviously Tom Brady is going to have a very large hand in that, right, Ryan? And you talk about all the sacks that he took, and my goodness, if he was playing behind the 2025 Las Vegas Raiders offensive line, then certainly he'd be taking a lot of sacks in 2026. I just talked about all the money the Raiders are going to have to spend next week. They are going to be focused a lot on the offensive line. They could also use a pass catcher in there as well. Brock Bowers will be back and healthy and all of those things. But when it comes to Fernando Mendoza, here's something that you're going to hear, okay? So first of all, the Raiders are not going to outright say that they're taking Fernando Mendoza until the day of the draft, because the NFL doesn't want the team with the #1 overall pick to spoil the party on draft night, okay? But they're taking Fernando Mendoza #1. Who they have as backups, it's immaterial to me. It does not matter, because what they want to do is to make Fernando Mendoza work for it. Okay, we've seen these quarterback competitions play out time and again with the top picks, and we're not handing it over to him, and we want to make sure that he earns it. And remember, of course, that Tom Brady, the guy who's kind of running this thing, was the number 199 overall pick and had to earn it at Michigan and earn it there with the New England Patriots. And so they're not just going to hand it to Mendoza until, of course, they hand it to Mendoza. So I do believe that Mendoza is going to be the Week 1 starter, because he is going to prove it out there on the field, first at rookie minicamp, and then at OTAs, and then at training camp before the Raiders suit up for the 2026 regular season. That is what I anticipate. But no, on draft night, when they do announce him, they are not going to anoint him as the obvious starter. But we can all use our common sense and say that the guy needs every single rep that he can take to save this team from the doldrums of the NFL. So that's the way that it's ultimately going to play out.
And we'll certainly need all the protection that he can take as well, because Geno Smith did not get a lot of that last year. A big reason why he is no longer going to be a member of the Raiders. Jonathan Jones, Ryan Wilson, thank you so much for tapping in with this breaking news surrounding Geno Smith. And breaking news, the podcast you should be tapped into is the one that Ryan Wilson does with the first pick all year long, and especially right now as we get closer and closer to draft day. Tap in, scan that QR code, and give a listen.